Hello and welcome to another episode of the World Class Real Estate Podcast. My name is Mark Waller. I'm joined by Ian McMeth. How are you, Macca?
I'm busy this week, flat out, absolutely flat out. So, yeah, just trying to keep my head above the parapet. I've gone against my normal rules of no appointments before 10:30, no appointments after 4:30. Today, including this podcast, I'm pretty much 8 to 8. 12-hour day. So yeah, I've gone against all the rules today, but had to because I'm out of office this week for 2 days. So yeah, you're kind of just cramming everything back into your diary. So really, really busy, but really important day today. So 2 podcasts, 2 second partner chats, good conversation with a developer, another meeting with a solicitor about something else. And then obviously Chelsea are on in the evening at the point of recording this. So yeah, big day. Big day. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Have you been watching the Club World Cup?
I have, other than the 2 a.m. one that was on Sunday morning. I didn't watch that one, but yeah, I've been watching it, obviously with the club in it. And yeah, it's a funny one because I think the UK are quite anti these sort of things, but the rest of the world are quite sort of bought into it. So it just seems to be the British public that aren't. I mean, it's not the standard of a Champions League, but you know, it's above watching the Coca-Cola Cup or even the FA Cup, you know, standard wise. Yeah, fair. So
interesting. Yeah, I mentioned it because it is funny how local, or in this case national, perceptions can change your opinion on everything. And if related back to property, sometimes what's happening in your own little market can be very different to the national outlook. We're going to talk content today, and it's important that you are putting that out in your content, because how many times do we get asked the question socially, what's the market doing? If you just quote national figures, you can be giving bad advice, giving a skewed view. Particularly, you know, we're a long way from London. Our market is like chalk and cheese, and obviously the London market dictates a lot of the national stats because of the size of it. So that national, local perspective on something like the Club World Cup, you can take into the property market and just learn from it a little bit. Really interesting in terms of where we are at Moving Works at the moment. We've not got, I don't feel particularly busy, and we've talked recently about we're not getting loads and loads of valuations, property advice meetings, we call them PAMs. So our PAMs are right down for June, as you would expect, versus where you would expect it to be at this time of year. I was starting to get quite concerned about that last week. And then we looked at our stats versus last year, and whilst our PAMs are down, our conversion is right up. So I said, I'd much rather be doing less PAMs and more take-ons than loads of PAMs versus not very many take-ons. You can improve that conversion rate. Sometimes when you're looking at the numbers, you need to actually analyze the right numbers, because actually PAMs is irrelevant. You know, I know you have to fill the top of the funnel, but if you improve your conversion, it's take-ons that's more important than PAMs. So that's where we're at as a business at the moment. But I am really encouraging the team to do a lot of prospecting at the moment to try and generate some activity, because I don't feel particularly busy at the moment. And I'm banging the drum about this period of time makes or breaks the year. You've got till the start of September, mid-September if you're lucky, to try and hit the annual targets. Our year end is end of year as well. So yeah, a really focused time in the office, making sure that we're getting some good conversations with clients and moving them through the decision-making process. That's sort of our focus at the moment.
Yeah, and back on the storytelling and the narrative and, you know, the news and the media, you know, and how that orchestrates people's thought. It's exactly what we're going to talk about with Rowan today. And actually, I know from talking to him off camera, he's quite passionate about some of the changes in how people receive information as well. Yeah. And he's going to share some great value with us on some different terminology, some different phrases, definitely stuff that estate agents need to be thinking about. I'm sure he'll share his story of his journey as an agent to running his own company, you know, the battles and the stresses of running his own agency, to now doing something that he loves, he's very passionate about. So definitely stick with this episode, because I'm sure there's going to be some great value shared across it at different parts of the conversation, as different milestones have kind of been hit for him. So yeah, very much so.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the reasons that I do the podcast is just to learn learn. This is a real hour of personal growth and personal development for me. We're recording this now, having just finished our chat with Rowan, and it's not often that you will learn new terms. I felt educated by today's episode, particularly towards the end, where actually I now know new terms and actually know that maybe our content needs to be evolving a little bit versus what we're putting out at the moment. So definitely worth listening to that sort of last 10, 15 minutes of value that he's really giving around what agents should be doing now moving forward. With that in mind, should we dive in and get Rowan on?
Yeah. So Rowan from the Property Pen. Let's go. Rowan, welcome to the show. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks very much for joining us, Rowan. We'll start, as we always do, with our opening questions, see where the conversation takes us. What does world-class estate agency look like to you in 2025?
I think world-class estate agency in 2025, and actually I'd say actually for the last 10 years, but obviously the tech has moved on. But I think for the last 10, maybe 15 years, it should have been about trying to combine old-fashioned traditional estate agent values, but with all the modern tech that can help you move that forward. And I think that trying to grow, I grew an estate agent from 2014 until 2023. And that had always been my plan, because I actually started without an office, and people were talking about me as if I was going to be a sort of a low fee, low service offering, because I didn't have that high street presence. And I was always saying, no, I'm a normal estate agent. I just don't have an office. I could do everything. The tech was obviously it was advanced, but it's shot so much in the last sort of 10 years. It's been incredible. But, you could still effectively market a property to the world through portals. You could utilize the best available of sort of, professional photography and all of that sort of thing that made it a brilliant marketing service. And you could just still apply the sort of the traditional estate agent etiquette to it without having to detract from service. And it took a long time for people to get their heads around it. But now people should have got their heads around it. And what they should be doing is not losing sight of all the things that made, good estate agents for 150 years leading up to the early 2000s, the mid 2000s, or 2010, 2015. But now using all this tech that's coming through, be that AI or whatever else it might be now that's now emerging that takes it even further to provide the best quality service to clients.
And you mentioned in that answer those traditional values, all of those things that have made estate agents good for the last 150 or so years. What, in your opinion, are those traditional values that still make a great estate agent today once they're enabled by all the tech?
Well, to me, what it was about, the reason I went off and set up on my own what I did set up was because I felt like, and I try and say this without denigrating the firms that I worked for. I worked for a big corporate, countrywide, basically, when I first became an estate agent in 2005. And then I worked for a very, very, very big independent estate agent. It's now being bought out by Leaders, Roman Leaders Group, or Leaders Roman Group. And they acted in a corporate way because it's the only way they could act when they were so big. And what I felt was missing from it was this sort of relationship that you could have with clients on a much more personal basis. So when I talk about traditional values, I think about things like, I go back to the high street really, but your high street butcher and your high street baker and even your high street solicitor, they were all kind of sort of forces for good within a community. And I think that estate agents should be that. Their natural place should be that if they're handling people's lives and they're handling it well. And then they do become a force for good in that local neighborhood. So that's really what I mean by traditional values. So relationship building, communication, and, integrity and honesty and all of those things that people would sort of spurt out naturally and assume that they're telling the truth. They probably all intend to have integrity and be honest. But I think when it comes down to it, there's so much pressure, perhaps in bigger organizations to get things through quickly because you're already having to think about the next ones that are coming through, that they can lose sight on making sure that everything has been, is this really the best deal that we could possibly get for this client, or are we really just trying to move this on and get it into the pipeline as quickly as possible? And that's where I think you can lose focus and lose sight of what the ultimate goal is, what your clients are trying to achieve. If you sort of end up chasing KPIs.
It's interesting what you say there about traditional, because what we're really talking about is not necessarily traditional estate agency values in its entirety, but actually just traditional local business values, like being part of that community, whether it's high street or the local Facebook group, it probably is the equivalent of these days, being that kind of recommended service in your local community. It's funny because I live in quite a small village, 3,500 people, or 3,500 chimney pots, I should say. Weirdly, we've got two high streets, one where the train station is and one where everyone kind of congregates. And on that particular high street, there's three coffee shops. One of them is Costa, two is Independent. And what I love about that particular sort of setup that I see is they will go to the Independents first, but they're quite small. And when they're full, Costa's the backup. Whereas that's not often the case. And that's what you'd love to see really with a estate agency, is go to the really good local independent that you can connect with. And then the backup option, if need be, is you go sort of corporate style, if you like. And that traditional value that a social community kind of brings is, we've missed that in agency, I think, quite a lot over the years. And some have got it and grasp it and they're amazing with it. And I was talking to Laura from Love Property in our Facebook group, Mark, that we're in, from Stephen Brown's mastermind, and she does so much in the community, but she'd got this defibrillator charity where she's now put 3 defibs in the local area to try and save lives. Just little touches like that make such a difference, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, such a big difference.
Yeah.
So talk me through your concept from going from a corporate or a version of a corporate to running your own business. What really were the core values and what were the success points that you had when you started your own estate agency? And then we'll get on to kind of the exit and what you do now.
Well, it's a good question because it's a story you wouldn't necessarily expect. I mean, I didn't plan to do it. Basically, I suddenly fell out of love with the job I had, and I think that I had misplaced blame on the company I worked for, which I'm slightly apologetic for now, because I left in a bit of a hump, and I didn't badmouth them exactly, but I wanted to be the antithesis of everything they were. But ultimately, they never lied about what they were. They were incredibly honest about being hyper aggressive, high volume. You're either on the bus or off the bus. And essentially, I just wasn't on the bus, so it wasn't their fault. I think perhaps 5 years earlier, when I had a different attitude to it, I'd been more inclined. Coming out of Countrywide and into this firm, I had a lot that I could come and offer because I was used to door knocking and I was used to tout letters. I was used to doing all of those things that they really wanted to sort of push and use in their business to kind of grow it. But over the course of 5 years, I just my own mindset about it just changed. I don't know why. I got older, got more mature. I don't know what it was. So I had a knee injury. Oddly, got another knee injury now, but I snapped my cruciate ligament, and it took me out of this kind of 60, 70 hour week job suddenly for 2 weeks while I had an operation and then recuperated. And in that 2 week period, I just decided that I didn't want to go back on Monday. I mean, I did go back on Monday, but that's when the plan happened. And that was the end of February, early March 2014. And by June, I'd left the company I was with, and then basically opened ISIS Estate Agents, as it was, which I suddenly had to change because unfortunately it was 2 days before ISIS burst out the borderlands of Syria and took over Mosul, and then had to suddenly do a rebrand. But all of that sort of thing, this is what I mean. There was some thought behind it, but I never ran a business before, didn't have any money. I went and bought myself a laptop and a mobile phone for the business and a DSLR camera to take my own photos with back then, which quickly changed. And I went out with some got myself a logo that I pretty much designed myself, and went out and I started to use the basic skills I had in a estate agency to go and drum up some business. And it was really, really hard work because I didn't do the dirty on the firm I worked for. I had enough respect for them for that, so I didn't set up in the same town as I had been working. I set up in the city where I lived instead. And although I had a bit of a network there. I didn't have any real network there. All my network, if you're working basically 60 hours a week somewhere else other than you live, when you are living, all you're doing is kind of, coming in, having some dinner, going to bed and getting up in the morning and going out before anyone else does anything. So I had no real, kind of network to draw on in Oxford, which is where I set up. So I had to kind of go and do it the old fashioned way, which was going and knocking on doors and putting leaflets through doors and writing letters. And, and I just gradually got going. But what I did well, I think, was I knew exactly trying to be the antithesis of what I didn't like meant that I had to focus absolutely on providing this and presenting this service that I really wanted to push as being that this is an alternative. You don't have to do it that way. And I was a sort of a lower general market agent. I wasn't looking for the high end stuff. I wanted to be an alternative for people who had 2-bedroom flats, 3-bedroom terraces, semi-detached houses, maybe the 4-bedroom wimpy detached house on the estate. That was my kind of market. Going, look, I want to do something that, if you go into Savills, for example, and they'll say, oh no, you're not the sort of property you deal with. Why don't you try corporate agent across the road? I wanted to be the alternative, so that Savills were going, look, actually, there's this independent guy that can do a really personal service, and that's how I went out, and that's how I built a reputation, and I did build a reputation, and I built it. Perhaps I built it online in a social media way before I really understood what social media was and the benefit. I mean, if I were doing it now, it could be so much different. Using Instagram and using everything else that's available now. It's amazing how different it is, 10, 11 years later to what we had back then.
So talk us through from that getting established. How did the growth plan then happen to build towards the exit? Was it last year? So yeah, talk us through that journey then, and some of the challenges that you faced when you grew the business, and then when you exited the business as well.
Well, I mean, so essentially, I was challenged all the time for the whole 9 years that I was open, and it wasn't really. I mean, I call it an exit, and I suppose I call it a successful exit, but the success was getting out because I just didn't want to be in it anymore. So I think that's where I want to start this. This 9-year journey wasn't actually necessarily a fun one. I had some fun along the way, but ultimately it was stressful and challenging all the time, just all the time. So once again, going into it back in 2014, I hadn't heard of purple bricks. Were just emerging elsewhere, but not in Oxford. And somebody said at the time, "Oh, you should have you heard of purple bricks?" I hadn't. So I didn't know that these kind of sort of low entry cost models existed. So I just went into it with all the knowledge of running high street branches, which meant get yourself a Rightmove account, get yourself a Zoopla account, get yourself all of these things. It just costs a load of money and get it as quickly as possible. But when you've got no money, that's really difficult. So I had to go to the bank. I didn't get a loan. I got an overdraft. I was very quickly at the end of that overdraft. I got a credit card, and it was just costly pretty much straight away. And it takes a long time for fees to come through. I was a sales agent from the start, not a letting agent. So I didn't have that sort of recurring income. I mean, if I were a lettings agent, I wouldn't have had the money to go and buy a book. So I'd have had to try to organically build a lettings book. So it was just me, myself and I for the first couple of years. And it started on in my pants in my bedroom with a laptop. And then it moved to me thinking, actually, I can't work from home. I don't have the headspace to work from home. So I had a serviced office address, like a virtual address. I went and took a serviced office in that building, which was in Summertown, quite a good address in Oxford, and that's where I live basically. So I could walk to work. I could have this office environment where I had 4 walls around me and my desk and my computer set up. And I did that after just 2 or 3 months. And I quickly realized that I was basically spending all my time in what was called the Oxford Wine Cafe, which was opposite. So I would take myself there to work. I'd work there for about, in my office until about 10 o'clock in the morning. And then I'd think, actually, I fancy a coffee. And I'd walk out past the kitchen that was there set up for people to have coffee in this office building. And I'd go across the street and I'd get my laptop open in the Oxford Wine Cafe, Summertown Wine Cafe. And I would just basically sit there all day and I'd make my calls from there. And I was working in this cafe environment. And I did that and I did it successfully. And I grew a business and I was making profit, a little bit of profit. But I knew I wanted to grow, and people were quite proud of my business and they were quite proud of my growth. People in my this network that had grown. I'd started networking. I joined BNI. That did really well for me. Man, I wouldn't say a bad thing about it. But I wanted more. I had, I in my head, I knew what a state agency looked like. And to me, and I've had my mind absolutely changed over the past few years, but to me, it still looked like having a team, having an office, and having a sort of presence in the high street. And that happened after two or three, I can't remember, 2 or 3 years. I think it was 2017 I opened my office. So in my third year. And it happened because we got invited to a wedding in Barcelona. And my reaction was, well, I can't not go to that wedding. They're best friends of ours. So I'm going to have to get an office and get some staff. I'm going to have to get some staff because I don't want people calling my phone and getting a foreign dial tone. And if I'm going to get staff, I want to get an office. So I just escalated, this sort of growth curve that I was looking at. And this is, once again, this is with no plan. Okay. So I was terrible at planning. So I just did it and found an office that had a year's lease in Summertown because it was getting knocked down a year later. So I managed to get that at half rent for a year. The rates were extortionate. I mean, this was costing me, 40 grand a year, this office. And at the time, the business was doing like 100 grand. But, by myself, I was doing 100 grand. So suddenly having 40 grand costs was quite a lot. It's not just office costs that come with it, because then I was filling it with staff because I didn't want it to be empty. So I didn't want to have just one other member of staff. I wanted to have two. So there were 3 of us, so that there was always going to be one person in. And this is this corporate mindset I had about how to run.
It is the classic, it is the classic way of doing it, though, isn't it? That is how, before the brokerage models arrived, that is the way that someone built their business. If they didn't have the funding at the beginning to go, right, there's 100 grand, buy your office, kit it out, that is the way it's done. There's a really successful estate agency around here that probably followed an identical story to what you've done there. It is very common that you kind of see that. And it doesn't surprise me that you've said over those 9 years that it was never easy. It was always tough. It is such a tough industry. And it's interesting to hear kind of those lessons that you learned along the way, and how things, sometimes you can plan for things, but sometimes they just happen, right? Something shoehorns it. I started avocado because of someone else's decision that impacted me, that meant I then had to make a new decision. Had they not made that original decision, avocado's not born. So it's kind of, sometimes that happens, which I think in agency is quite common. We spoke to quite a few people, Mark, on the podcast, where that is just the way sometimes it unfolds without real strategy, because it is such a hamster wheel kind of transactional industry that you just make the decision when you need to, rather than because that was the plan originally. It doesn't surprise me that that's the journey that you sort of went along.
Yeah. So that journey then continued. And so it continued. So after that year, when I needed to get a new office, we opened another one. And by the end we were opening another one anyway, actually. So we were looking to open Summertown was a bit of a high value marketplace. It was my local high street, but it didn't have enough of that everyman market. And people thought, once again, they had this perception that I was trying to get into the high end stuff. So I wanted a kind of a general market branch, and had found one, and was meant to be taking another office within Summertown to carry on the Summertown branch. I was going to have 2. And then that one I got gazumped on by an agent. There was another agent that was getting pushed out of the same building as I was. And they knew the landlord of that building, whereas I was going to sublet it off the agent that had left that building, left that unit. So I lost my Summertown office, and I thought, well, actually, I am sort of just hemorrhaging money at the moment. Let's go to Rose Hill instead, and we'll consolidate there and reduce my costs, and we'll do that for a year, and then we'll see where we are. And actually, I never made it back to Summertown. In the end, I decided I didn't need Summertown. We opened a village office instead. So by the end of the 9 years, I then had two branches and whatever it was, 5 members of staff. And it all looked hunky dory, but it hadn't been. Even when, so some years we made profit, some years we made loss. Pretty much we were hitting break even, but break even didn't mean I was paying myself. And that's the thing. There was some benefits in doing it. I had a lot of personal pride. I had a lot of respect in the business community in Oxford and in the local community in Oxford. So people loved the brand, but not enough people were using it for us to be growing at the speed that I felt I needed to not just have a job. And actually, I didn't really want a job. I didn't want to be doing the day-to-day work of an estate agent. I didn't actually enjoy that job. I enjoyed the job of being a lister and a manager when I was managing estate agents. I didn't like everything else really that I was doing, which, you have to have that attitude to it if you want to go and run an estate agency business. So by the end, I just realized, look, this isn't fun. And if it's not fun, I want to do something else with my life. So my exit was selling my assets. It wasn't selling the business. So I effectively, sold off the lettings book, sold off the sales book, and managed to get out. And that's the success from it, is that it allowed me to move my life on. Not that I came out with a big packet of money and, was able to swan off on.
Let's move on to that then. Let's talk about now. It's good to get the background on the story, because it means that when you're working with clients today, you've done all of it really. You've done the independent, you've done the corporate, you've started your own business, you've given 9 years of that, you've brought staff in, you've branded, you had to rebrand. I mean, just going back to why ISIS originally, like what was the thought process before ISIS was a thing that you went, ISIS, that's a good name? What was that about?
So ISIS, so we're in Oxford, and ISIS in Oxford historically, well, and even today, is the river. Is the River Thames in Oxford is called the ISIS. So there still is a lot of ISIS named businesses, but there were so many more. And so for example, the second boat of the Oxford boat crew, that's called the ISIS, for example. I think there's an Oxford University magazine called the ISIS.
You don't really sign a business with that name, though, do you?
No, I mean, we had the ISIS Academy in Oxford. Imagine the phone calls they were getting. So, it was a sort of a ready-made brand when I did it. But I decided really early on, oh God, actually, I think that's, I haven't gone far enough into it to worry about it too much. So let's just change it. And it became effectively, by a roundabout route, it became Waller's Estate Agents, which I'd never wanted to name it after my own name, but that's what I ended up with.
So then what took you into copywriting post agency?
Post agency. Well, what I did enjoy when I was running my business was all of the communication and all the PR stuff, which I really wanted to do, and I did it myself, and I did it well, and people told me I was doing it well. So I liked that bit of the job. And in the meantime, and I've always been a writer, so I've always written, like since I was a child, I was writing, and I've had a children's book that's out, and I've got another one that's on the way. So I'm a writer by, you can't call it by trade, but for love, I love writing. So writing was a really natural thing for me to do. And, unfortunately, I knew a couple of people in the industry that do it, and I got their advice on it. They've been really, really generous with that advice and their help on how to do it. I had somebody who I knew that was an estate agent, and I called them and said, look, I am thinking of doing this. Do you think that it's a good idea? And they said, well, yes, not only do I think it's a good idea, but I'll be your first customer, because we need someone to do it for us in this other office where they're not able to use somebody else because of a one per town rule. And so they became my first customer, and I fairly quickly grown. I've only been going actually since February. Really, I left, I think, on the 28th of January, and was therefore set up in February as the property pen, and it's going all right. I mean, I'm half a year in, and I read this an article by Christian Byfield the other day about the sort of the vanity of you watch businesses that are flying, and that's what social media promotes. And unless you grow really quickly, you feel like you're failing. And I was a massive sufferer of imposter syndrome when I had the agency, when I had the estate agency. And it's actually one of the reasons that I didn't enjoy it and didn't think I was doing well enough to carry on. We can come back to that or not, but that's it's the truth. And I think a lot of people suffer it. But Christian's piece was actually about growing slowly. It was about actually take your time, grow this business. Don't worry about effectively running before you can walk. And that's much more what I'm doing now. And actually, it's possible because your costs as a writer are very, very minimal compared to the costs of Waller's was costing me 30 grand a month. So it's a very different sort of thing.
Yeah, it's a passion as well. I think when you can do something that you're passionate about, that's the sweet spot, isn't it? Really, that's the definition of success. You know, if you're earning money from something that you love doing, absolute win.
Exactly. I'm passionate about it, and there's a need for it, right? So, and that's where you can make money. I'm passionate about writing. I could try and be an author, but I probably wouldn't make much money because lots of people try, and it's very hard work. So you need to be able to fulfill a goal for a marketplace in order to make money from it. And I think that, you know, when it comes to brand building, it's still really, really essential that there is some sort of written word there in the background. Even if it's going into reels, there's something that needs to be crafted that gets a message across.
On that point then, what do you think estate agents should be putting out in terms of written word, and where do you think there is a bit of a opportunity for agents to take advantage in this marketplace?
I mean, agents should be putting out lots of different content. So they need to be looking at their, you know, content pillars basically, and making sure that they've got a broad mix. A written word's useful because it can form a kind of a real good foundation for all sorts of other content that you want to put out there. So I write blogs, and I think agents who aren't writing blogs are missing a trick. And a lot of agents think, well, people don't really read blogs anymore. But it's one, that's not true. People do read blogs. Secondly, when people are trying to make a decision about something that's big, like moving house, then they do suddenly become a lot more interested in educating themselves. So they start to find this. So blog writing, I would say, start there, and then you can expand everything else that you do content wise from that. But there's different types of blogs, and I wouldn't say that people shouldn't do other types of blogs. I don't typically do blogs that are things like 5 top tips on how to dress your house before marketing and that sort of thing. But that's useful content. It's just not my cup of tea. I typically write more narrative style articles, and you can have technical writing articles. You can have expository type of articles. You know, there's different ways of doing it. But narrative, I enjoy, and I think that the reason for doing it is because your audience will buy into it. So if you tell them a story, then people will engage with it. Now, you have to know how to hook them. You need to know about narrative theory. You need to, you know, how to, you know, from equilibrium to disequilibrium to realization of the, you know, and then restoring the balance, and then back to equilibrium, all of that sort of thing. Even if it's about a property sale, you can put that into a narrative, and people will then read it because they're designed to, you know, it's what they're having a story told to them. So I typically think that your content should be, I mean, you know, you want it to be clear, concise, and consistent, and all of that sort of thing. So these are all, you know, marketing tips that you want. But ultimately, if it's not engaging, if people aren't going to read it, then I think you're sort of missing the whole trick. So if you're going to be talking about market statistics, for example, that is really important because you'll show your authority to your market if you can look like an expert. And whether you're using a copywriter to do it or you're doing it yourself, it's a really, really useful thing for you to be doing in your agency to tell your market that you know what you're talking about. But you need to do that consistently as well. It's no good doing it once every 3 or 4 months because people will forget that you did it. So you know, I'm talking about weekly content that goes out there, and people aren't going to read it once a week. But one, it's going to really build your SEO. 2, it's going to really build your AEO, and I think that's going to become so much more important. People don't yet know what AEO is, but it's Answer Engine Optimisation. So people are now using ChatGPT to say, who should I use to sell my house in Marlow? And you want ChatGPT to be saying, oh, you should be using Avocado Property, or you should be using whoever it is. You want to be the answer. You don't want your competitor to be the answer. And it will decide that based on the content that it can find. And that's different to what SEO is, where SEO would go, well, we think that you want to look at this website, this website, this website, this website. So people are gonna very, very quickly become used to AEO. And you know, you even see it now you see Answer Engine, what's it called? AI overview. When you type into Google, it will give you an AI answer first, and then it will give you that's kind of AEO in action. So all of this content is good for that. So statistics matter because you look like an expert. However, you need to have I think there needs to be a story there. So the story, okay, so that you can have an article about there being, you know, did you know that 40% of properties in Darlington of Victorian terraces or whatever it might be. It's a stat, but just because it's a stat doesn't mean it's a story. So what's the story there? So what I tend to do is look for the story. There's a story to be told. There's something that people are asking in this local market. They're asking questions, and you always want to be answering questions in your content. What's the question? What's the story that people are hearing that they want to know more about? And then you tell that story, and you can bring statistics into it that then shows your authority, builds your expertise, but does it in a way that they do read from word 1 to word 1500 or whatever it is, and go all the way through and go, wow, that was really interesting. I'll look forward to reading that next week. I mean, they don't say it out loud, but they start to think it. And when they see it week after week after week, and it's good expert content, they become fans. And that's the thing. And I think the reason that independent estate agents get really frustrated because they do all this wonderful stuff, and they support the community fair, and they're there on social media, and they're doing all this brilliant stuff. But then they see this house go on the market with that corporate agent on the corner, and they never even got a call, and they can't believe it. But it's because estate agents I say we, because I still feel like I'm an estate agent, even though I'm not. But we're egotistical. We think that we are the most important thing in kind of life. But for most people, they're not thinking about us most of the time. They think about us once every, I think it's like once every 19 years people move now. I was taught it was once every 7 years when I got into corporate, but it's just not true. So most of the time, people aren't thinking of moving, and we're really not top of mind. So to the point of content, whether that's reels, whether it's social media short form posts, or whether it's blog articles, is to put yourself into their lives where they start to go, oh, that's real. I quite like this person. I'm going to follow this person because it's interesting. I'm not thinking about moving, but he says some interesting stuff about the market, about current affairs, about how Trump's tariffs are affecting the value of my property, about what mortgage rates are doing. There's never a day that you can't talk about property in an expert way, but also in an engaging, narrative way that helps people go, oh, this guy's interesting. There's a point is when I had Wallers, I was getting recommended by people who I didn't know. And that's where I realized I had this ability to tap into something else. So I was getting recommended by Sally to her niece because I sold Sally's house and her niece had said she wants to move. But I started to get recommended by people who, I'd say, how did you hear about me? And she said, oh, it was, Jane Smith. And I didn't know who Jane Smith was, but Jane Smith was just following my stuff on Facebook community page and said, oh, when you move, you should use Waller's estate agents because he really knows his stuff. And that's what content creation can do if you do it properly and if you do it consistently. And whether you use a human being or whether you use AI, but you have to be a little bit careful using AI. I think people have this idea that done beats perfect. I don't disagree a lot of the time, but sometimes I just disagree. I think done beats not done at all. That doesn't always beat perfect. That doesn't always beat not done at all, actually. You can do something and it doesn't beat not done. You could do something that's pretty rubbish and doesn't do you any favors. But if it's done and it's not that good, and it could be good if you just spent a little bit of time on it. I mean, I use AI, by the way. I use AI to help me write. I'm not a dinosaur. I'm not opposed to using AI. I won't use AI and say, look, can you generate me an article about how this base rate change has affected property prices in Middlesbrough? And then copy and paste that and give it to somebody. But I might use it. I might actually say, how has the base rate change affected property price in Middlesbrough? And give me some clues. And then I start doing my research. And actually, even if it's given me a draft of 350 words, that 350 words is nothing like the 1,500 word article I end up presenting somebody. And that will have taken me 5 or 6 hours from the point of engaging with ChatGPT in the first place to actually presenting an article that's worth putting out.
Can we?
I think that's the danger.
Just following on from what you're talking about there, I had a DM. I don't know about you guys, but I get a lot of LinkedIn DMs that are just like spammy, annoying ones. And flicking through here, I've got hi Ian, circling back. We're closing few placements. I've got hi Ian, 80% of property managers using automation. Hi Ian, would it be possible to book a 5-minute? Just like, shut up, leave me alone. But then this one guy yesterday, hey Ian, ever watched two pigeons fight over an Audi duck wrap? And I was like, what is this guy talking about? And I had to read it. I was like, I need to know the answer to that. And then he really, really good, and then to the end of it, he kind of goes, he does like a couple of, it's like the sentiment, but beings to nod a lot with the tinkering. Is this cannibalism? Was it just them getting a pitfall meal? Kind of, it was quite an interesting read. And then the end, he's like, you're probably wondering who TF the fuck I am. Fair question. I'm Ed. And then he kind of sold his bit, but he hooked me in with an interesting, random, unexpected story. And he only had two lines to do it in a LinkedIn DM, but it's the first LinkedIn sales message that I've probably read in a month.
You actually wanted to read all the way through. Well, that's the importance of a good hook. I mean, you need a good hook in all your content, whether that is a short form social media post, or if it's a reel, or if it's a long form blog article that's 1,500.
Can I just circle back to the AEO? I've never heard that term before. And we were with a younger family member who's 18 at the moment. He was saying to me, he said, none of my mates use Google anymore. It's all straight into chat. So, okay, that might be a while before they're property owners, but also something that we should be planning for. Can you just run through very quickly before we finish what that looks like and what content agents should be putting out or how they can improve their AEO?
So the most important thing to think about is you really want to be looking at people first. I mean, even though that was Google's thing, but it's still how these things are geared. So it wants to be people first content. So it's not stuffed with keywords, not in an unnatural way anyway, but you want to be writing relevant stuff. So answer engine optimization is answering a question. So your content you have to be thinking about what the questions are. So the questions that homeowners ask are, how much is my house worth? How do I sell a property? What's the market doing? Will my house price be affected by such and such? And then you make sure that the content you're writing is answering those questions. Whether you literally write the question, then you answer it, or whether when you're just writing your stuff, you're building in this question and answer into your piece when you're talking about 40% of properties in Darlington being terraced houses, right? So you can write an article about that. But if you start putting content in that starts answering the questions that people are actually answering, it's going to be coming up in this thing. So when people ask which estate agent should I use in Darlington, it's not going to be giving those people the answer, use this estate agent, because they know that 40% of terraced houses, of houses in Darlington are terraced. But it will be part of that overall expertise that these artificial intelligence systems are scooping through. And going, oh yeah, this agent is, he knows this. This is about the market. This is about them. It's not dissimilar to SEO, but it's much more direct. It's actually saying this is what you want to do. You should be looking at this agent talks a lot, and it can be individuals as well. It doesn't have to be brands. It can be an individual talking about the market. There'll always be a little link symbol at the bottom of this AI overview, for example. AI overview that links to whatever the source material is that then they can go to and then read more. And that's why ideally you want these blogs on your website, because the whole point is it brings people to your website, and then once you've got them on your website, you want them to go and look at other stuff, look at the properties you've got for sale, look at your valuation page, whatever it might be. But the point is that you need to direct people to your window. Effectively, when we haven't got shop windows anymore, your window is what you've got online. That's what people can see, and that's how they engage with you. So you got to drag them.
I think the AI summary, the Gemini summary on Google, for example, until you just said it then, on this episode, without realizing that is my search answer. That is where I go now. I don't bother scrolling down on the first page because I just take that information, because normally it's better. We've got there really quickly. It's not always correct. So you have to be really, really careful with it. And that's another thing that people, I'm seeing incorrect stuff in blogs and in articles and in Facebook posts. And it's, by the time I've seen it, they've got 17 likes, and you don't want to go, oh, actually it's not. But, it's slightly dangerous. But we've got there really quickly. We've started to use that without even realizing. In the space of 3 or 4 months, I don't know when I started realizing it was there, but that's already how I use it as well. And if you think about when Instagram sort of started to come through, and agents we'd only just started to get used to using Facebook, and then people saying, oh, all the young kids are using Instagram now, and you're going, yeah, I know, but they can't afford houses. Well,
that's where agents are nowadays. Agents are on Instagram selling houses. So these young kids are now, late 20s kids, early 30s kids. And that's these 18-year-olds that you're talking about. 5 years time, they'll be homeowners. Maybe, I don't know. That's a hard task in Oxford, but they will be on that journey, on that ladder, whether they're tenants or buyers or whatever else.
Yeah, no, interesting. No, it's a good summary, and it's interesting to get a real good sort of understanding of where you've gone from starting as an agent in 2005 and doing the corporate life at Countrywide, like a lot of agents kind of start their career, and then to get to this point, where you're now looking at this aspect of it. I do think there's a place in agency for a lot more of that type of value. I do think that estate agents still I think the phrase that you've got on your website is something around connecting estate agency brands through the written word, I think. And I think, from that aspect, like you said at the beginning, I'm pleased you said it, is there needs to be pillars to marketing. There needs to be pillars to content. One of those pillars is the written word. And I've seen that as much video as we do at Avocado, and as much short stuff and long stuff and podcast stuff, people might not see, but we also do a lot of written, a lot of newsletter led marketing, a lot of SEO led marketing. And still to this day, out of the top 5 traffic pages on our website that we've got, obviously you've got the homepage, you've got the valuation page where you send all your ads, you've got your property search page, but in the top 5 is one random blog that was written in 2021 by one of the agents that is still to this day the most organic top 5 page that we have never run an ad to. That blog just connected with Google, and it just brings in serious amounts of traffic every single month. And it surprises me every time I look at the Google Analytics at the end of the month. I'm like, there it is, that blog again. It's 4 years old. It's still relevant, but amazing to see that cornerstone piece of written word content that, as much money as I spend on ads and as much money as we do on videos, that still beats most things every month.
And that's the thing. So this, the long form blogs you have will always be there for your SEO and AEO benefit. They will always be dragging people to your website, even if they're not reading them. They'll be being told that they should go to your website because of them, because they've got that sort of draw through, and they've got the relevant content on it.
No, brilliant. So thank you for joining. We'll obviously put all of the contact details for yourself in the show notes as well, if people want to get in contact with you. What platform are you playing with mostly these days? Is it Facebook? Is it Instagram? Is it LinkedIn? Is it all of the above?
It's mostly LinkedIn, and I mean from a business point of view, I don't do very much on Instagram, but LinkedIn, I live there basically.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks for joining us. And we'll have this episode out.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me.
No,
it's been a pleasure.
On the Property Pen for joining us today. Really insightful about specific content, Ian. Really interesting to hear, particularly that term AEO. I feel a bit stupid for not knowing that term ahead of today's pod. Did you know it?
It's a new one to me. I understand that the terminology, absolutely not. But as I sort of said, with the summary at the top of Google, and it makes total sense, right? That we've focused on AI for creation. Yeah, we're like, right, we can use chat for this, and property descriptions is where it started, and then it's evolved into blog and scripting, and you've got action figure. A lot of the prop tech companies are using it to create themselves into action figures and things like that, which is is fun and exciting. But actually, AI is an intelligent animal that's now reading our content, and that's what we're really talking about here. Is we have to be, and a lot of people are saying. I mean, I did a podcast, Matt Gigg's new podcast, and I went and kind of watched Mike do it, and we were talking about who actually in the room. There was about 8 of us in the room now use chat as their search engine. Yeah, it's 50% of the room already. Middle-aged group, and if you're able to recognize the fact that AI is now the strongest reader of your content, well, what does it look like? Because it doesn't miss a trick. It reads all of it very quickly. So very, very insightful. from that aspect of things. And I'm sure because of the way that he thinks, his business will be a success, a bit like you were saying at the start of the episode, actually, rather do quality and conversion than volume. And I think Rowan will do that with his clients, is he's really looking at the quality and the conversion over the volume based aspect.
And
of
really interesting, obviously skilled, trained writer in some of the terminology that he was using that was lost on me about how to write a story, by the way. But he is really passionate, and I thought he was very honest about how he came to start his own agency. There's some of the trials and tribulations that he had as he was going through that, but you could see when he started talking about writing how he really came alive and very passionate about that, but also very, very knowledgeable. And that storytelling aspect, and we all know that, if you can tell a story, people will be much more engaged. You're much more likely to convert a client if you can talk them through an existing case study that's just like them. We all know that, but I don't know how many agents are actually taking that on board and putting it out in their content. And that was a really interesting takeaway.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always say to each new agent that joins, the basis, and I've shared this before, my first target when we were creating a social media led company, my first target before we'd launched anything in the half year prior to the year that we launched was to write 100 blogs by Christmas. That was the basis. I think I got to 63 and we probably used 25 of them. But the whole point was about writing the content to then create the video, create the imagery, create the graphic design that led from it. But it all comes from that written blog. Because once you've written it, you can say it so much easier on camera, and you're able to fine tune it, the layout, how it looks. What is the hook? What is the summary? What's the call to action? How soft or hard is the call to action? What's the value piece in the middle? Is it clear and concise? And once you've written that, bang, you're into video, you're into graphic design, you're into newsletter, you're into email campaigns. And once you've got that, AI can do that for you. Here's my blog. Can you give me a script, a short post, an idea about a reel, 3 pieces of graphic design that you use to promote it? Boom, that's where a tech comes into it and does the part that previously you'd write the blog, send it to your marketing team. They'd spend 3 weeks doing that and send it back to you.
Yeah. And that's the real strength of it. And also, you what you're talking about just is repurposing it, and that is the key to any of this. If you're getting written word and taking the time or paying an expert to produce that for you, then you've got to make sure you repurpose it in all of those other ways so that they then form those content pillars that you mentioned. So really, really some great learnings in there. And I think some challenges for agents just to think a little bit differently about what they're putting out and why.
Yeah, totally agree. And a lot of agents are not putting anything out. So, now the good thing is you can put stuff out with purpose. If you listen to this episode, you can put stuff out in the right way rather than just scattergun approach. And it will probably give you a bit more of a steer point and direction of how to do it. I've shared in the past Answer the Public, which is a great website to start that, because it tells you what people are searching in Google, so use that and then base it backwards to create that.
I think we've got the title for the pod anyway. Yeah. So a massive thank you to Rowan once again for joining us. As you know, we do this because we love our industry. We want to see it improve and get better. If you have enjoyed today's episode that has been sponsored by Iceberg Digital, please share it out on social, reach out to colleagues. I'm Mark Worrell. He's Ian Macbeth. Thank you very much for listening. We'll see you again next week.